I have a goal, and you can all, we have a lot of stuff to cover tonight, but my goal is if we can get everything covered tonight, you can maybe skip the December meeting and have instead like an in-person post-turkey trot wrap-up lunch somewhere. That would be something. So that would be my goal. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody. Good seeing everybody's faces. Let's see here. The first thing we need to do, I'm going to call us to order, is approval of the minutes from the October meeting. I hope everybody got a chance to read them. I didn't see any corrections or anything. So if there's no corrections or suggestions, I would welcome a motion to approve the minutes from October.
Just FYI, there were a couple minor suggestions that I just put into place, but they don't substantially affect the meaning of the minutes.
Cool. I move we accept the minutes as amended by Deb.
I second the motion.
Julie made the motion. Marge seconded. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Oh, that's cute, Daniel. All right, motion passes. Thank you. Good job, Deb. Okay. Finances, Debbie, treasurer.
Okay, I'm going to share a screen. I hope you all received the email I sent out with the, oh, let me find it here. It's hard to find here. Hold on. I know I had it here. Then what?
All good.
Hold it. Then I looked at the agenda and now it's, okay, there we go. Okay, here we go. Okay, so if you received the email that was sent out with the financials in it, you saw that the cash and investments are here. We're still very flush, even though we've spent a lot between, as you can see there, October 31st and now. We're trying to pay for all the things that we just had and for the turkey trot. There's a lot of expenses going in and out now, but we still have very good cash flow. Yes, we are looking to move some of this large amount in the checking to another fund, but this year's gotten away, and so our finance committee has not met. And so hopefully I can get with Valerie, and Valerie's, I think, the head of the finance committee. We can get some other things going and see about moving some of those somewhere else where we may have more of an interest-bearing account for those. Okay, let's look at the year-to-date. We are still, again, very good in these. I've updated the numbers for the races. The only one that really is outstanding would be the turkey trot. And it's on track to make money. So that's our big money maker. So things look like they're going to happen there. Let's see. I wanted to say that because of how the turkey trot falls in the week and it's Thanksgiving and there's all kinds of things going on, just try if you can to get me any kinds of invoices or bills that need to be paid as early as possible so that we can make sure that we get all of the items that are needed delivered or everybody paid that needs to get paid. And then as quick as we can afterwards, before the end of the year comes along, so that we can close out the race books for 2024. And then I think we're going to talk a lot, right, about the budget coming up soon. So I'm going to leave time for that. I'm kind of revamping this sheet just a little bit for 2025 now that I've got my kind of head around what we need and what would be better to report. How is it better to do the reporting? So if anyone doesn't have any questions now, we can either wait for the 2025 budget discussion or do what we need to do. Anything?
Nope, that's fine.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing, and if I can share again if we want to do the 2025, or you can. All right.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and bring up the 2025 proposed budget, because that's the next thing on the agenda, that would be great.
There it is. Hold on. 2025 draft. Okay. These are the draft numbers for, I'm gonna bring it down a little bit so you can see it at once. See a little bit better. Is that too small?
No, that's fine. That's good.
Okay, just to allows us to see it a little better. So we
Okay.
see we have the donation, the same categories as we've had at the beginning. I moved the income from equipment rental to others up to the income part. It's a little better, I think.
Mhm.
Races, I think all the race directors, or at least race directors to be, we received race budgets. So it looks like on here that I didn't put these numbers in, so thank you so very much for doing that, Tracy. If you have different race numbers, race budget numbers, and you're a race director or a code race director, let us know and we can fix those up. I'm going to move down a little bit here. The way the chart of accounts is set up allows us a little bit better reporting. So I've kind of delineated it a little differently than last year. So the first part is, can you see my cursor? I'm not even sure you can.
Yeah. Yep. I
Waving
can.
it. Okay. The member community, other events, income and expenses. So our club kind of broken up into the things we do in the community and our general expenses. So the things we do in the community, such as the 1200 Club, that's sort of our club event, the marketing, all of the things we give away to our members, the challenges, different things that all involve members pretty directly are here. And then if we go down to general club expenses, that's more of all the items we need to have the club function. And so we've put budget numbers in there. And if you look at the very bottom, income and expenses, we are, again, have a balanced budget, which last year we did, which was my first year being involved in the budget. I didn't set the budget, but I fully agree on having a balanced budget and a little bit of cushion in there in case we have other things that come up that we need. Last year,
Actually,
sorry.
Debbie, what I would say is right now with these numbers, we don't have a balanced budget. We're off 13,000.
We are in the other expenses. Oh,
Yeah, but the notes below are what I would suggest we do to then balance the budget. So it is balanced.
income.
The
Okay.
income's higher than the expenses.
Yes. Okay, not balanced. You're right. I meant in the plus.
Right. We're not in the
Plus.
yeah.
In the black. There you go. And we didn't hear the whole year. I think I sat in on this budget meeting last year as just a member of the club, but I haven't heard, and I don't think anyone else has heard, about the money that we supposedly owe the IRS that was on the budget on the notes last year. So, I mean, they're hard to communicate with, but we haven't heard anything about that at all. And I believe they would definitely tell us if we owed money. We'd be receiving notices all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so I like the notes down there. Increase the community. These are things we can go over as a club or as a board to do for this budget.
What I wanted to point out to everybody was the budget is the income is basically the budget. If we make these suggestions, is going to still be slightly higher than last year, and that's primarily because our income is higher. But if you'll notice, there's a really big shift in where the money is going. Instead of putting it towards storage and professional fees, it's going to membership and RRCA and other things. So it's in community outreach. So while the budget overall hasn't changed a whole lot, where it's going has changed significantly for next year. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, do you have other notes you want to put in there or say about that? I think that's what we have here. I don't know, when do we approve this? I don't know.
Well, what I'd like to do, if we can approve it at this meeting, that's what I would like to do. So does anybody have any questions about the proposed budget and the suggested changes to make it balanced?
Go ahead, Margie. Go ahead.
One thing that I would make a kind of adjustment to was the member picnic. I think it was about $750 instead of 500.
Oh, okay.
Just to be more accurate, maybe 800 inflation. But yeah, so that would be one adjustment that I would make to that.
Okay. So if we increase member picnic, 800, make it easy, by 300.
You want me to go ahead and enter that in here?
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so Tracy, you mentioned a couple things, that were just a few minutes ago, saying that the income and expenses are about what they were, for this year, but there's been what you described, a shift in priorities, less on professional fees, less on, we're paying less for storage, so
Yeah.
we can put the money, well, to my mind, better places, back to the membership, back to the community. Do you see any other? Because I looked at 2025 budget, but I did not look at it in comparison to 2024. So do you see any other significant changes or shifts or from 2024 to 25?
The only other shift I would say, it's not so much a shift as if you look at the race income and expenses. I think in the 2024 budget, we had expected more revenues from the races, and there's more races where we're not expecting as much income. And that's okay because we don't need to have as much income from them because we're getting income from other sources. So I think that's the main thing.
Okay.
I also think that when I did my little study of all the race numbers through the last 5 years, races are recovering from after being canceled so much in COVID. So I believe that races will continue to people will get them in their minds more, be able to come to races, and the revenue will continue to increase at least a little or break even more. Last year we had several races that didn't make any money, which we're not looking to do, but didn't break even. But weather is also a big factor on that too, especially with what was it, Hagmud last year, that was so hard.
Yeah. And I also think that the race directors, I want to thank the race directors for providing all the information that they did. I think they were very conservative in their participation numbers for next year. And so if the races are going to start recovering more than we anticipate, they will make more money than we've got estimated here.
And one thing we did, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, just as speaking as a race director who had to provide multiple budgets, I won't say it was fun, but I will say it was a valuable experience because, it's been a few years since I really, dug deep into the numbers, the events I do. And it was frustrating at times because for whatever reason, the records for the last couple from the previous board were incomplete. And I understand part of it was, COVID and all that, but even so, I had to make guesses in certain situations as far as, what expenses and income were and all that stuff. But I will say it was a valuable experience because it's like you got me thinking about, numbers and numbers of participants and costs and all that kind of thing. And so a recommendation when I just said, for Turkey Trot, looking at that, because I did a similar shift with Ralph's run. When you go from like I say, if you have a race where everybody gets a certain thing, you need to account for that. And Turkey Trot is a great example because with everybody getting a beanie, it's more, and we need, I think I say, looking for 2025 to raise the cost just a little bit, and to cover. When you get things in bulk, you get them for less, but even so, you still have to increase your fees just a little bit to cover it, kind of thing. That makes sense, that the cost is shared broadly, but even so, looking at next year for Turkey Trot as an example, to raise the fee just a couple of bucks just to account for since everybody's getting something, whether it's a
Yeah.
meeting next year or something else. But once again, it was a valuable experience.
Great. Any other questions about the budget?
Tracy, are we required by our bylaws to have a balanced budget?
I believe we are. I think
Oh.
as a nonprofit, we're required to have one.
And does
Well-
balance mean we have to spend it, or balance means we can't go in the red? That's a good question.
Yeah, because I mean, being on a nonprofit board that was a school, we had years where like we needed to build up our reserves because they weren't big enough. So there were years where we were banking. I don't know. It's just like the idea that we have to change something in our budget because we're in the black. Whereas like if the stock market completely dives, then we're going to be in the red. Like there's a certain unpredictability about that.
Right.
I find that a little confusing coming at it. And it's a little hard, like for next year, it would be great to have like a side by side of the current year's budget and expenses year to date next to the proposed budget as a comparison. I know we're all kind of new to this year, but yeah,
That's a good
so
idea.
I find that a little puzzling. Does anyone else find that puzzling? Because like, I don't see us wanting to, spend an extra $4,000 on community events. If like a race loses $4,000, then we're gonna,
So
it's weird.
maybe I can help historically here.
Okay.
It has to come pretty close when we are budgeting. If we are building, if we end up with an excess or a surplus, and it can even be an intentional excess or a surplus, I don't think as long as we are making a good faith effort to estimate, nobody knows what's going to happen. I mean, God bless Stephen for what he tried to do at the convention, but the club took a bath on that, but we didn't know it was going to get canceled because of COVID. So, we're making a good faith effort here. I think you do need to have it. We don't have to spend that money if we don't want to, but we have to account for the fact that if we have it, it's there and we're balanced. We have to start with a balanced budget and we have to come pretty close to it. It's just, not only is it, I don't know if it's legal or not, because I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I would always say it's just a good practice to start with a budget. And if we start seeing an excess build in and we don't spend the money, great, then we can put that into reserves and make, Julie and Tracy did this when they were president before with the turkey trot. They ran balanced budgets pretty evenly throughout all the races. Turkey trot was the cash cow, and they managed to make $250,000 doing that. So I feel like we do need to start with a budget and a plan to make it balanced, even though we may not spend all the money. We know we may not spend all the money. I think simply by having conservative participation numbers, we are going to make more money than we thought. I think that's a good thing. And I feel like those adjustments at least if they aren't made, they at least need to be noted. And so we're starting out that way. If anybody sees, wait a minute, you're banking $30,000 or $20,000 or whatever to begin with, where's my fees? Where's my race fees going? No, we're doing these things. We have a note for it, and it may or may not happen. But I think we have to start as close to zero as we can.
And part of it too is we have a nice fund in reserve right now. If we didn't have that fund in reserve and we wanted to build it up, then yes, we could say we're going to have this excess income, but we're going to put this excess income into our reserve, and that would be a budget item. And I did that with a previous organization where they were trying to build up their reserve. And so they actually had a line item where we knew we were going to make X dollars over, and there was a line item that says that money's going to go into reserve until we get up to a certain level. So that's definitely something that some organizations need to do, but we're at the point where we don't need to do that right now. And I will say, I think we're going to more than we're going to make more than income than expenses in the next year, simply because like if you look at some of the suggestions in the notes, we're dropping down dividend income. Well, I know we're probably going to get more dividend income, but I want a balanced budget. So we're going to have excess funds there too. So it's just a matter of, like last year for community outreach grants, we only budgeted 3,000 and then we wanted to increase it by another 3,000 and we had to make some adjustments in the budget. But it really is, you start with a balanced budget and then it's a fluid moving document that you can adjust later on if you need to.
I mean, for example, like I'm following my race registrations for had really a lot compared to some years where there were tons of participants, and I have a really tight budget for that race because it's an expensive race to put on. And like, I really wish I could spend money on advertising, but because I think I would actually make that money back. Like, I don't know, Facebook advertising, I don't even know if it's worth it. Carissa might have some opinions on that, but there are some places where like, I feel like in my race budget, it's really tight. So maybe I don't have to stress quite as much, but
I wouldn't stress. I wouldn't stress. And even if your race loses money, I mean, the head mud is still recovering. And if we can build it back up, great. I would say that's one where I'm not concerned about it making money, or even if it loses money, because we'll be okay in other areas. So just kind of do what you can with that.
And our race, I mean, this is an aside, but our race director is allowed to make decisions about it might be worth it to spend $50 on an ultrasound.
Oh,
at that.
absolutely.
Totally.
Things like that.
Totally.
Absolutely. Yes.
To do that. Okay.
I do. Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Whatever you need to do. Any other questions about the budget?
So is there,
I'll call for the question.
Margie, what did you want to say?
I was going to ask about the 13,000 that shows that we're in the black and we have a little reserve. So is that noted as a, in some way, just, or would you
No.
just leave it as such?
No, what I want to do is, if you look at the notes down below, what I want to do is decrease the dividend interest income. And at this point, I'm going to decrease it by only 7,070 instead
Okay,
of
it's fine print.
and then increase the community outreach by 4,000 and increase the RRCA expenses by 2,000. And that would then balance the budget.
Okay, okay, I see what you're doing there. Okay, yeah, because I was thinking, you know, some of those race budget numbers were like making only $30 and so forth. I think that makes me feel there's a real risk that they're not even going to make the $30 then. So when it's so tight like that. So, but yeah, okay, I understand. Thank you.
Okay. So let's do this. I would welcome a motion to approve the budget with the adjustments noted below.
I move to accept the 2025 work budget with the additional notes that will adjust the expenses and create the balanced budget. Mouthful.
Second.
Mark
Much
seconds.
easier.
Mark makes the motion and Mark seconds it. Okay. Any
Call the
further
question?
discussion? Yes.
I said, call the question.
Okay.
Can Debbie, can you stop sharing your screen so I can
Yes,
see better?
okay.
Thank
Yes.
you.
There we go.
Oh, okay. All right. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. We have a budget for 2025. Thank you all. And again, thanks everybody for submitting their budgets so we can get that done. All right, next up, the award nominations for the banquet in January. Did we share this with everybody? I don't remember if we shared with everybody. Julie and I went through and we have figured out some recommendations for budgets, and I should have awards. for awards, sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. So we have some club awards and we have participation awards, runner of the year awards, things like that. The ones that are calculated simply based on how many times they participated or how many times they won, those are easy enough. They're just standard. We've got those all figured out. So for the club awards, what we did is, for example, for the Almacata Award, we went through and we actually just looked at all of the people who participated in our events this last year who were over 70 years old. And the person who got it last year had by far and away the most numbers of participants. But so we would like to nominate Alan Boyce for the Al Nakata Award because he was the next person. And for the Helen Lackman Award, we wanted to give that to Carolyn Westlake. And the for the Kathy Weidkamp Award, we actually we had a nomination for Liz Potter, and that's Hal's girlfriend. She was the one that was showing up at a lot of events and helping out and things like that. The Dick and Diane Bemrose Volunteer Award was the person who volunteered the most at all of our events, and that one was Juliana McFarlane. We have all the 10K series completers. That's not a problem. Female Runner of the Year. Male Master Participation. Volunteer of the Year Award. This was somebody who we also looked at. We wanted to give that to Judy West. And the Club Appreciation Award, we thought to give it to Foot Traffic because they were partnering with us this year for all of our Monday and Thursday night groups. So those were the main club ones. And then since they're not here, we can go ahead and discuss it. Had some nominations for lifetime membership. The first one was Bonnie Benton and the other one was Hal Brockman. So those would be the awards that we would give out at the banquet this year. Does anybody have any thoughts on those?
Excellent. I agree.
I like him. I would love to find some way to get Rob Rickard named for something. He was at a couple of our races this year. It was good to see him, but
Yeah.
I get it if it's another year.
Won everything. He won everything. That's the problem.
He's won everything, but he was really, I thought, really cool having him at the summer solstice with Ruth.
Yeah, it was great seeing him out
So I
there.
mean, it was quite a moment for me anyway. So, and Rob's just like the greatest. So
he is.
All right, I'm good with it. I think you got good choices there.
We will move forward on those. I don't think the board needs to approve them, but do we want to have emotions or?
I'll move to accept the nominees as presented.
Okay, do you have a second?
I seconded.
Margie,
I'm
second?
gonna just make a point that if it's in the minutes, then if Hal reads the minutes, he's gonna see it. Do you really want a motion?
Can you please leave Hal and Bonnie out of the minutes for the
You
awards?
could just say that we decided on two
on-
lifetime membersps
To be announced later.
at the banquet.
Okay, hopefully they won't listen to the recording.
I doubt it.
We'll see.
If they do, we'll be actually sending out invitations to everybody who's going to win an award. We might not tell them what award they're getting, but we're going to tell them they are getting an award so they can know to come to the banquet in January.
Okay, I wasn't fast enough to type all of yours anyway, so
We'll send you a list.
is it so? I can just leave it out of there completely.
Yeah,
Just say we decided on award recipients. leave it vague. Okay. Before we get to the next one, there was a discussion topic that was added. Margie was going to give a brief report on membership so far.
Yeah, I kind of pulled out some numbers from Runside, and there's a few other things that I'd like to drill down on a little bit later on, and I can just send those out as an email to the board members. But in comparison from last year, year to date, this year we have members year to date of 772 members. Last year at this time was 735. And how interesting though, memberships, this year we have 552 and last year was 735.
I think that's an error.
Yeah, yeah, that was in
Because
the
it
run side.
matches the total members, so I think it's wrong.
Exactly. But it made me curious about how many were family members, individuals, and students. And we have in family memberships 112. We have individuals 431 and students 11, which I'm cheering. I love that. So those came out to our numbers then. So one of the things that I'd be curious about in exploring is what is the average number of people in a family, and that kind of thing. So, but if I drill down on some of that, I'll let you guys know.
Cool.
Any questions about any of those numbers?
Nice to see they're going up.
Good work, Margie. Thanks.
Well, you guys are all doing the work, you know, the race directors and, you know, the promotions. That's what it's all about. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Anyway, just a little thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the next topic is board candidates for the elections in December. And we have 4 candidates, actually. I thought there would only be 3, but then Mark Takazawa threw his hat in the ring. Thank you, Mark. So at this point, we have 4 people on the ballot. Valerie is going to run for re-election. Carrie Fleischer is going to becoming a new member. Kimberly Hartwell would be a new member. Kimberly Hartwell would be a new member if they're all elected. And so if this is if everybody's elected, which I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, we'd be losing 3 members, but we'd be gaining 3 new members. So we would stay at board at 12 people on the board now, right? So, do we have to approve the candidates?
I don't think so. I think they're,
I don't think we have to. I think we can just on there. And Carissa and Dave Barnes have updated the website, so that information is out there, and we will be sending a special email just to members at the end of November, with the link to the ballot, and letting them know. It'll be a lot easier this year because there's not as many people running, and
and you can run it.
and I can run it since I'm not on the ballot, so I'm not having to explain bylaws or anything. So that's good to go. So thank you everybody for agreeing to run. Okay, before we get into the policies and procedures, I want to just quickly ask a question about the Shamrock Expo. I was contacted by Shamrock and they were excited to have us join them again. I wanted to make sure before I signed up that we were all okay with doing Shamrock Expo again in March. Everybody okay with that? Okay, we'll go ahead and move forward on that one.
Yes, send out the date so I can get that on the calendar, or do you know it already?
Yeah, it's the Expo is the Friday and Saturday before the Shamrock one.
Okay.
What day it is? I have it on mine. I'll send it out.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to, before we go to policies, we don't do policies and procedures first?
Yeah.
We have 2 more topics. One is policies and procedures manual and RRCA convention, talking about who we might want to send. Any preferences to what order we do this in?
Let's
Nope.
just go policy.
Okay, we'll go policies and procedures. I want to thank everybody again for the great work they did on their sections. You sent us a lot of good information. I did make some adjustments with the appendices. What I did is I created a shared Google Drive of instructions so that the policies and procedures could be a little bit more general with very brief information, and I put the more detailed information into race director instructions folder with an item for each event. So if you can share that information with your co-RDs and things like that, share that with everybody. There were a couple of items that we needed to discuss, and do you have them?
Right, you were going to share the screen.
Okay, I'm going to do share the screen thing. See if I can do this. Student procedures. Can everybody see this? Okay.
Yes.
So the first one, item of discussion is one that Mark submitted under the VP of Race Operations. It's just a statement that said, hold an in-person meeting with race directors at least once a year, hold Zoom meetings as needed. And Carissa made a comment, and I think I agree with it. I think we should probably have this be, have in-person meetings if possible, otherwise hold Zoom meetings or something, so we're not requiring one. The main thing is that I think we don't have in-person meetings for the board, we just have Zooms. And I know in-person meetings are great, but I think it would, we can strive for them at some point, but I think if we're trying to get some new people, sometimes it's easier for people to be able to attend the meetings, especially if they're coming from farther away. So I just kind of wanted to get everybody's input on that one line item there.
If I just, my intention was, how can I say it, was I'd rather, I'm tired of Zoom meetings, and
I know, I know.
because of my work
I know.
schedule, this is the only way I can do it.
Yeah.
But that being said, I like the wording that you suggested better. I mean, than the one I submitted, other than, that it's not, I don't want it to sound like it's in person is mandated. It was not my intention, but rather that indeed it is encouraged.
Okay.
And so the wording or something like that you mentioned, I think is a better wording for that. And I think it should, as a policy, be true for the race directors for meeting and for the board as well. Practicalities being what they are, Zoom meetings are typically easier for people to attend, but certainly let us encourage each other to have in-person meetings, however that's worded.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get that wording changed then, so that'll resolve that one.
Yeah.
The next one was logos. And we have here, races may have individual event logos, and Carissa asked a great question. Is the event logo subject to the approval of the board or the vice president of race operations or president? And I honestly didn't know that, because we had several new race logos this last year. And I don't think the board approved them. I think it was just the race director working with, at the time, the graphic designer to figure out what they wanted. It was brought back to the board. Now I know there was a question about the Shampooey logo, and they're going to try to create a new one. So
Do we want to make like community charity?
do we want to make it like the community, the charity thing where the race director has to bring the charity that they're donating to the board for approval? Or do we just want to leave it for approval? Or do we just want to leave it up to the race directors?
I would say,
Did anyone else go to the logo and rebranding workshop at RRCA out of those of us who went? I think I may have. Debbie, were you there? Oh, I can't hear people.
Yeah, I think
I
I
did not.
went, I think I did for part of it. I remember some branding and logo discussions, but I don't remember going to the actual session. So maybe it was within a different session.
Okay, it was like this club in Florida that redid their logo because it was pretty
Oh.
old, like the 80s.
Yes, I did go to
Yeah.
that. You said
Yeah,
that,
so
yeah.
I think one thing that is really an important learning from that workshop was that you don't really want to be one person making the decision. You probably want a committee of like 4 people that are participating in like having the vision for what the race. I mean, a race is a little like a club logo is really, really, really important. A race logo can have its own feel and everything. It can be separate. Separate somewhat identity. But you don't want to just be one person making that decision, because you want to know like what's the vibe you're going for, what are the like if I were to redesign I know the Hag Mud logo got redesigned a couple of years ago. There are things that I don't like about the logo. Like, I think it's a pretty logo. It's extremely generic. It doesn't tell me that it's Hag Mud when I look at the logo. It just looks like a lake and mountains when I look at the logo. So I think it's good to have more than one set of eyes on it. I don't know that it needs board approval, but it should be more than one mind that's participating in that process.
To my mind, to my recollection, there's never been a policy on race logos. I know however many years ago when the club got its new logo. It was a big process of, different
That's-
versions, blah, blah, blah. And we eventually, but decided on the version for the club. And that's a big decision. In all the years that I've been a race director, I've never sought approval from the board for a new logo. So it's never been an explicit policy, at least that I was aware of. However, Deb, as you say, like for Turkey Trot this year has a new logo, I kicked it around, like you said, I didn't do it by myself. I found an artist to, hey, do this, try that, and so it had many eyes on it before it was approved for Turkey Trot, so there was not an official board approval. However, I certainly, presented the logo to a lot of board members and say, hey, what do you think? Until, decided on what the logo would be. So, yeah, go ahead.
Carissa and then Dan?
Yeah, hi. I kind of have two concerns, but it's kind of along what Deb said. I think it can be a little dangerous if we don't have enough eyes on it. It's not that I want, it to be approved by a board necessarily, but sometimes I see logos that just won't reduce well, for example, because somebody with graphic design expertise and having manipulated the logo for different purposes hasn't reviewed it. Or, maybe the colors would clash with ORRC colors, or just some other perspective might be missed that ends up being relevant. In the case of the Shampooey logo, I criticized it when I saw it, because basically, yeah, we had that Yampa, the carrot kind of figure from before, but we replaced it with what I call a symbolism of white imperialism, basically, because it's like a ship. And it was unfortunate. I know it wasn't intentional, but it was just unfortunate that the symbolism went from respecting indigenous cultures to a ship, so sometimes I just think a diversity of opinions is important, diversity of perspectives, to make sure it's not offending some people could be important. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay. Good comments. Okay. Daniel?
So I don't necessarily say we want to have a board approval on a logo, but let's have somebody with some expertise put their eyes on it. We were struggling working with the designer to get a logo for summer solstice or for Dave's solstice. I went back to some of Dave's t-shirts that he used to have and tried to create something a little more on that line, but artsy. And we ended up with a nice logo. I wouldn't call it a logo, a picture for summer solstice or Dave's solstice we put on the scarves and on the posters and everything. Problem is, it's a bear to reproduce in silkscreen or any other format. And what we basically did was we took a beautiful design and made it really complicated. And I was good with it because I knew how we were gonna print these. But what I forgot was I'm not going to be the director next year. Somebody else is, and I don't want them necessarily to inherit this complicated design. Back when we had to do one for Greenway Trail Trial, we had a simple 3-color path that was excellent, and it was very simple, easy to. I didn't even see it. I mean, hey, oh good, we got one. People like it. Let's just go. If we'd have had a little bit more of a process in place, somebody with the tech and the graphics background of somebody like Carissa or somebody like her, they would have seen that and said, how are you going to put that on a t-shirt? How are you going to put that embroidered on a hat if you have to later? You're not. We were going to do a visor, and it wasn't going to work on a visor. In fact, one of the reasons we didn't do a visor was because it wasn't going to work on a visor. So I think what I would do is have something here. Races may have individual, I would just put something in the process. It's a procedures manual. It's not a rule, it's procedures manual. just to have a considerable input from others before locking it in. Because the logo we did for Dave Solstice is going to last 1 year. I didn't want to pursue it more because I want the new race director to be able to have their own race. And so I just feel like I wish I'd have had a little more, I should have run it by a few more people and had them think about, okay, now that we got this, how can we make this so that it can be used in multiple places? I didn't say that right, but I think you guys got my idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could we,
Yeah.
could we just add a section that says races may have individual logos as decided by the race director, but logos should be researched to take into account formats for marketing or something like that.
I don't like that at all. I'm going to be
No?
totally honest. One thing I'm noticing just stepping into the race director role is that it does feel like you're kind of like a ship on your own. Sorry, I pulled that from what you said, Chris. I didn't really mean a ship, but I feel like there could be better coordination. Let's just say, I don't think it's a great idea to ask race directors by themselves to be the one that decides, even if they're getting like there should be a graphic designer. It should be considered with the ORRC logo. It should, I mean, that's your marketing materials. This is important. It should not just be like, if we want like really folksy designs with everything, then they should all be folksy designs maybe, but I feel like it should be, I'm not saying I want folksy designs, Chris. I heard you saw your head pop, but like, there should be some consideration and thought. And I think that we're prone to not looking very professional, which may be not what the vibe is. But anyway, it could be a logo that like we should have the Pantone colors. It should be, of a sufficient number of pixels or whatever it is that they can blow it up for a t-shirt or shrink it down. Like there's considerations that I think that this should be just fleshed out a little bit better. Races can have individual event logos. If there's a change in logo, then, graphic designers should be consulted and, several people contribute to ideas and review.
So is everyone using their own graphic designer? I mean, I know the club had one until fairly recently, but is that now part of each race director's budget to seek their own graphic designer to figure this out? Because I'm looking at Deb here because I actually tend to agree with Deb on this, where some form of consistency or some I guess just ground rules on, I don't know, pixels or this is not my area of expertise, but I would have no idea how to go about creating a logo and what would need to be required. I would have to consult with somebody that has far more expertise than I do. I wouldn't even know what to ask. So I think from that perspective, some ground rule would be helpful. And I do think there should be some consistency. That's my opinion.
Susan?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there should be some level of competence in the choice of the design and all the other elements that Deb just described, pixels, et cetera, et cetera. You can't just have someone put some piece of crap up there and have it be the design logo for a race. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine.
Bad choice of words.
So we are in agreement, unless I hear otherwise, that we want to have, that races can have individual logos, but logos need to go through a,
Well, I think we need to flesh out exactly what process that the race directors would need to use.
And it looks like Mark has something he wants to say too.
Mark?
Yeah, well, two things. One is what I think you're getting at is that we want from here from Deb, isn't part a technical consistency for logos, for different multiple formats and all of that. And I think that's getting into the weeds. And I don't think, I'm not an expert, but to my mind is a better use of time let's consult an expert, have them come back at a later meeting with, okay, here's the pixels, here's the format, PNG, whatever kind of thing. So we can say, you know, for now, just say we want technical consistency logo, for logos. The other thing to say as far as finding a graphic designer, I work with Leslie Jordan and I work with Ashworth Awards, and they have graphic designers on staff. And I have done this like with my Vernonia medals. I said, hey, I got a picture from an old t-shirt and I send it to them in a PDF format, and they take it and they manipulate it, and it comes back looking better than anything I could do. So they are certainly not the only ones, but keep in mind, like if you're working with Ashworth Awards, Leslie Jordan, or other, companies that make shirts and hats and the whole bit, they likely have graphic designers on staff who, if you can present them with an idea or a starting point, they will be a great asset to you if you're looking for a logo.
Is that generally part of the cost that is that an extra cost, or is that included in the order that you're placing, that they do some complimentary graphic design work to get your order ready?
It's at no additional cost.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say that in the past, when we've done logos, before we had our professional graphic designer, we were usually able to find somebody who was a graphic designer who would help us with the logos. So we did have somebody do that. I liked Carissa's statement in the chat. Usually there's a number of requirements. She said, if you want, I can put together a sheet with general suggestions and best practices as a starting point. And what I would say is, let's kind of go on to the next area, but we'll say that we can have individual race event logos, but we'll try to write up some type of policy that we can add to this at a future point for race directors to help them get that done.
Yeah. And for my mind, it does not need to be technical in here. It just needs to say that it should be designed to a professional level with consultation from multiple stakeholders to make sure that it is, like there's some wordsmithing, but I don't know that we need the technical specs in there, but I do think it needs to be just a little bit more fleshed out to give some suggestions.
Technical specs can be in some other instructions there.
Sure.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next section. Bear with me as I find that. Here we go. Okay. Deb wrote up a really good section on to update the website for HAG MUD for non-binary transgender, and I put that in here basically to say that race directors do not have to have non-binary or transgender categories at their event, but if they did, that we would want them to follow the ORRC policy. And then Deb made a good point that this should be discussed by the board. So I'm gonna let her kind of lead that part with her concerns possibly of this section. Did you want to get any more specific?
Yeah, this actual screenshot shows the policy as it was basically written when I inherited HAG. It's not actually exactly the wording that I have.
Oh, I thought this was the one that you put in there. Okay.
No, I think Mark actually might have put that in there.
Okay.
So then I went into our internal document of the RD manual, where I guess we won't be using that in the future, perhaps, but we'll discuss that. But I updated some stuff with the medical section. Like, I think that document is actually very good as an aside. Like it's better in some ways. It's different than the one that we do for public consumption. But anyway, so I wish I could call up the other one. Can you stop sharing the screen and I can try to bring up the other one that I wrote? If I can figure out how to share a screen.
You can copy and paste your version into that one to replace it if that's a better version.
Well, so what's wrong with that version is that it's I have to get out of my notes in order to do it. I actually have it in here. Okay, so let's see if I can figure out how to share this. Okay. How do I? All right, any tips on how to share a screen, y'all? I'm sorry, I've not done this.
Do you have it up on your computer?
There's a green button on the bottom of the screen. It should be right in the
A
middle.
share?
Well, yeah, so I have multiple screens is the problem. I've got my Zoom screen and then I've got this one, this document. So I'll see if I can figure out how to do it. Sorry, guys.
Click on share and then click
There.
on the,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Ugh, let's see. Safari app. Documents.
For what it's worth, the first version I saw was one written by the previous race directors for Hag Mud, and I modified it just a little bit to make it to create a template for other race directors to use, and I just based that template on the example from the Hag Mud race directors, and that's the one that I put in the race director manual. Having seen your revised version, I like yours better than the one that was in it before. So
maybe
for what that's worth.
I can email it to people after the meeting. I think the important thing is that I actually was like, well, if this is a policy that is going to be used as a model for other race directors,
yes,
what I did in the race director manual, the internal version, is that I actually just, first of all, I researched what RRCA's policy is. And then they partnered with this group called Non-Binary Running, who have like this whole multi-page document that gives advice. And, you know, I can't get that into 2 pages, but I tried my very best. And I think that if we are going to have a model policy, it should kind of explain and be a resource for race directors. So I changed the language, for example, to say that ORRC seeks to create a fair, inclusive, and affirming space for people of all genders, identities, and experiences to participate in running and walking events while also promoting fairness in award competitions. And so I talk about the RRCA fair competition policy, which involves also like a gender inclusion and fair sport policy, which is a better way to phrase it than non-binary and transgender. And just explain, like, we're trying to welcome more people to the races, if to our races and events. So if you can just give people an option, does it cause you any harm whatsoever? No, it doesn't. It's very easy to do. And RRCA points out that if you're using a sign-up platform that does not allow you to do that, then you need to change your your race registration platform. So RRC really does support it. The only stipulation is that they do have some guidelines where in certain races, like if there's awards or prizes, so I think we're talking like elite competitors, people getting prize money, then those races you have to comply with the US ATF rules of competition, which are very strict. Like transgender females have to transition before the age of 12 or puberty. It's extremely strict, and it's like going on like the International Olympic Committee regulations. And we're running community races. Like,
that's not us.
That's not us. We're not giving $1,000 prize money, right?
And who's
so there's like you can sign up for whatever gender you want, and we're not going to police it at all, and we don't care. And then there's US ATF and IOC, and then you could also say in the middle, like, hey, maybe have gender transition, testosterone suppression for at least a year before you sign up as a female. So there can be, but then the explanation I give is that if you decide that you're going to have regulations, it can come off as very patronizing, I guess. And so race directors, I think, should just read through what I wrote, and there's like a sample version that you could use. Again, I think it's I don't really have a problem with it being up to race directors, but I would say that instead of just saying it should be up to race directors, I would say I would encourage race directors to do it because it's in accordance with the RRCA fair competition policy, right? They're trying to lead us into the future of just welcoming people to our events and being healthy with running and walking. So if that's the point, then it's no skin off my back to create a welcoming space.
Yep.
The other thing that I think is really important is that you need to train your volunteers, because our volunteers could be coming from any place, and they can, I guess 2 years ago at Hag Mud, there was someone who was misgendered and it really ruined their whole day of the race. And so there's like some simple tips that I put in there, and I'll just copy and paste this and email it to the board. I could stick in the chat, but it's huge.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and email it to us.
Okay. All right. Sorry for all that.
No,
Anyway.
no, that was really helpful. Yeah, I'm gonna go to this. Okay.
Yeah.
And the last, I think the last one, the race director workshop manual. This is where the goal was, we want to have 3 main documents. We have our bylaws, which are approved by the members. We have our policies and procedures, which is approved by the board. And we have our race director manual, which is not necessarily an ORRC one and an outside one, but just one race director manual. So what I would, the link that I've included here is to the generic race director manual, not to the ORRC race director manual for ORRC race directors. I don't mind what I'd like to do is get all of the great information that's in the ORRC one, if it's useful to all race directors, whether it's an ORRC event or not. I'd like to get it into that one so that everybody can use the one document. So we're not having multiple race director manuals, some for us.
Well, just to clarify, and maybe it's being redundant, repeating myself here, but the content of the ORRC specific race director manual is now part of the policy and procedure manual, correct?
No, because what we're doing is, I have not gone through the ORRC race director manual and put that information in the policies and procedures.
Okay, because to my mind, it should not necessarily everything in there, but certainly everything in the ORRC RD manual should be reviewed and considered to be part of the policy and procedure manual. It may not all fit or whatever be appropriate, but at least review that.
I think what my perspective would be is that if it's a procedure that is appropriate to a certain section of the policies and procedures manual, yes, we can put that in there, and hopefully we already have kind of talked about that. If it's really more detailed instructions for our race directors to use, I'd prefer that be in the individual race instructions, like all the appendices that we have, or we have a separate section if we think it warrants its own section. But I don't want a whole manual inside the policies and procedures. I'd rather make it so that the generic manual, the race director manual, has enough instructions that our race directors can use that. Because I don't think there's anything really that would be so specific to ORRC other than vendors, which we have in the generic one. Here are vendors you can use, or something like that. In the appendices, for example, it says we normally each race has its own appendix, and it has in those instructions, you're going to use probably these vendors for porta potties or for results or for timing or whatever. So some specific stuff is in those appendices.
I think it would be useful for you to go through and look at the race director manual. It's like 45 pages long, and it is very specific to ORRC.
Right.
And this might be another conversation for another day, but either there just have to be links to things from RRCA. Like to merge those two together will be hard, I think, and some of this content is very specific to our policies. So figuring out a way to either have all the race director stuff in a race director manual that's for us, or have a generic race director manual and then the stuff that's very specific to us. Like, for example, I'm thinking of that there's like a safe sport compliance policy that I guess maybe we're required to have because that's how it's phrased in there. That's very specific. That I think that maybe there's stuff in here that needs to be considered.
Okay.
So maybe it's
Yeah,
maybe it's a to be decided in January or February, like a work in progress.
well, having, because I worked on about a year or so ago, a revision of the ORRC manual. I mean, I put a lot of time into it with the intention of, I wanted to give new RDs very specific information, good ideas of how to be a race director, but also specific things like use this vendor, blah, blah, blah. And I guess my concern is that there's a lot of good information there, and I don't want it to be lost or for it to be kind of put in a place where it's less accessible. So, and again, like it's kind of a trade-off, like Deb is saying, it's a trade-off. If we want to put it in the more generic RD manual, it's going to dilute some of it and you're going to lose something. I don't know. To me, I guess in the interest of time, Tracy, I think you and I, and maybe include Deb in the conversation too, need to have a conversation as far as what this looks like or how best to proceed. You know, because like I said, there's good information, but I don't want it to be lost or put like 2 clicks away and nobody ever reads it because it's 2 clicks away. So perhaps that Deb and Tracy, you and I, and include Deb in there too, to talk about what's the best way to handle this.
Could I ask a question of why, since we're ORRC and we have races, why do you have a generic race director manual?
For the RD workshop. Or we train people to put on their own events.
Right. That's a whole separate thing though, right? So I look at it as there are 2 purposes. There's an ORRC race director manual and there's the generic. And maybe there's similarities between the 2 of them, but they have 2 different purposes.
Yes.
That's just me thinking.
Okay. And that could be the case if we think that's where we want to stick with that. And then we can just, in the policies and procedures under race directors, we could have link to ORRC race director manual.
Right.
Do that instead.
Yeah, and maybe that'll be the strategy, but let's in the interest of time, let us talk about that later, bring it up in another meeting.
Okay. So those are the 4 things. I think those were the 4 things that we had to talk about for policies and procedures. Understand that the policies and procedures is a work in progress. It's a living, breathing document, and it's not like the bylaws, which we very rarely want to change. This is something that we can update whenever we need to, just by a board vote. So with those discussions, I do like the idea of having a discussion about the race director manual and the ORRC race director manual and stuff like that. Do we want to go ahead and approve the current version of the policies and procedures, understanding that it's still a work in progress and we'll continue to work on it in the next year?
I'll make that motion only to say that it is always a working project.
Yes.
It's always a work.
It's always a work in progress.
It's a working, breathing document that will always be amended. And I'd also like to add that it doesn't necessarily take a vote of the board to amend it. Perhaps a discussion, but not necessarily a board vote. I don't want us hung up on details if we have to make an adjustment. So I will move with that stipulation. I so move.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, Daniel motion, Margie seconded. All in favor? Say aye or raise your hand. Okay. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you so much. This is a really hard document to at least we have something, but we have something now, which is good. Okay, the last item before we get into Turkey Trot is RRCA convention, having a discussion about who should go. And I had sent everybody an email about people who had expressed interest in going. And
I
people
forgot
who-
to get back to you. I'm sorry.
oh yeah.
I think I want to take a position that I'm honored that somebody nominated me, but I don't feel right having the club send me to the
You can always do
convention.
that next year too, so you don't have to go now. We can always send you later. Okay, so let's see. So we had, I know Jewel didn't want to go. So the names right now that we have who have expressed interest, and I think we should, who people of others said they should go. One was Carrie. One was Kim, because she would be new. We didn't end up putting him on there. Mark said he wanted to go. We had others on there. Your email. I had 5 or
Susie
6.
said something over email that she liked the idea of sending new people.
Yeah, Susie said sending new people. Trying to think of, we have a couple of new RDs. I would say also possibly sending Mark Takazawa, because
As a new board
if he,
member?
as a new board member and as a race director. So that would be 4 names currently there. That's Carrie, Kim, Mark Barrett, and Mark Takazawa. Daniel said he would be playing there. Susan Cooper?
And that also had Deb Brown's name on it.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right. Deb Brown. That's right. I wanted Deb because she would be having a different perspective as a new race director as well. So that would be 5.
So how does ORC, like, I'm wondering, like last year we had someone who ended up not being able to come. How does the club feel that it works best for getting buy-in so that people go if they're granted and purchased? Like, do you feel like it's that we should partly fund ourselves and partly no?
No, the point of the club sending people would be to either, one, reward them for work that they've done really, historically, it's always been rewarding people who've done really good work with the club. Last year, and I think I would like to do it again this year, we had a lot of new volunteers, and to me, sending you to RRCA would, one, get you a lot of good information to help you do your job better, your role better within the club, and bring back good information to the club. It also helps with representing the club to have more people going. And it also gets people excited and enthusiastic and invested in the club. So it's kind of an investment in our volunteers to come back and help the club continue to thrive and grow. So that's kind of my philosophy to what we would do. What does everybody else think?
I agree with you 100% what you said, Tracy. And on basis of that, Carissa, I think you should go. You have done so much for this club in the last year or so, and all the research and you have been in contact with the RRCA leadership. So if nothing else, get to meet all those great people in person. Meet Jean. I mean, she's a great person. So Carissa, I mean, I think you are deserving for what you have done and for what you will learn by going and bring back to the club, which is the purpose of this, is to send people, they learn stuff, they get excited, they come back, and it helps the club. So let me just, encourage you, put your name back in the hat or back on the list, whatever, because I think you are and would be a better asset by going.
Susan?
Yeah, I think that the whole list of the 6 names that you had, that you just sent, Mark Barrett, Deb Brown, Carrie, Carissa, Kim, and Mark, I think they all should be encouraged to go. Obvious reasons, especially Carissa.
I will.
Carissa, you
I'm
should
just
totally
making.
go.
I'm just making the point that if there are more people that want to go, that if for example, like self-funding part of it is needed, I can do that too. So, especially being 2 years in a row, that's.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Or maybe I should just put an email. But I don't know. I'm interested in going, but I would like us as a club to actually kind of promote the RRCA more to the membership too. Like, I'm not sure that everyone realizes, for example, that when you become an ORRC member, you become an RRCA member too. So I wish we could put out some messaging kind of like promoting both. Like, the benefit of joining the Oregon Roadrunners Club is you become also a member of the RRCA. Maybe you didn't know that. Maybe a bunch of us are going to this conference. So I don't know. I just want to encourage it more. And I guess I didn't mean to suggest I wasn't interested in the conference. I am, but I'm a little uncomfortable accepting money, like when it's a lot of money. I wish more people could go, and maybe could we consider like subsidizing part of it, or I don't know. I just feel I want it to be a different kind of thing. But I don't feel like other people agree with me. I just like, why are you paying for stuff for me? I want to volunteer and I want to support the club. So I feel bad taking the money from the club. Does that make any sense? Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you know, Carissa, we're so broke. We're so broke. And I have to agree with Mark Barrett when he said that the value that you bring to the club, and then getting the chance to see people that you have been in contact with, and I think that there would be value to that, and it would be enjoyable, I suspect. But yeah, no, we have the money, and so there's more that we get back from that. The other thing about promoting RRCA, I did a lot of traveling for many, many years. And one of the things I would do is see where the RRCA clubs were when I was traveling. And I would join in if they had workouts and that sort of thing, and found it really valuable. So just from that experience too was a real benefit for the RRCA for me. So
and as I mentioned,
go, Carissa, go.
Let me
You
ask
should go.
Let me ask the question of the group, because we have a newsletter coming out, and I just renewed our RRCA membership. So we're sending the check-in, so we can start requesting insurance and stuff. I was thinking on my next article, I could talk about RRCA and how I just renewed our membership, and this is what it does for the club, and this is how many people we're sending to the convention, which is more than we've done in the past, because as a club, we can now afford to do that, and this is what we'd like to do. One of the things that we could talk about in the next year is for the next year's RRCA convention in 2026 is, do we want to put something out to the membership saying, if you're interested in going, we can provide a scholarship for $500 or something to help you if you want to go, or something, so that invests in members who then might come back and say, hey, I had a great time, now I want to, we could do something like that in the future.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
And Minnesota's I'm from Minnesota, so we'll be on my home turf.
You betcha.
You betcha. I know all the great places to go to eat or to run, and we can all go to the Mall of America if you want, and or the Guthrie, or anyway. So it's on my home turf, and I will be glad to take
There's a whole video, Mark, that I saw recently that was like, yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah, no, that explains like which things really mean yes, which things really mean no. It was really It's
Oh
funny.
my gosh.
Oh, for cute. Oh, for cute. Yeah, that's all. There's a whole book, How to Talk Minnesotan. I'll share it with you so you can learn how to talk to the locals when we go.
Okay.
Oh, for cute.
So-
Oh, for cute.
So I think what I'll do then is there's 6 people. Oh, I'm on, yay. So there's 6 people that we've got on the list. I will contact those people individually and confirm if they want to go. And if so, once we know the numbers, the people, then I'll have Mark do what he did last year, and take charge of registering and transportation and all of that. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Mhm.
Okay. Daniel, you had your hand up?
You're muted,
You're
Daniel.
muted, Daniel.
This is I mean, I don't want to take too much time because you guys have to do turkey trot. But I just wanted to announce kind of what my intentions are. I mentioned that I was going to go on my own, probably on my own cost. Back in early September, I let the RRCA know that I was a candidate, that I was making myself a candidate to be the RRCA state rep for Oregon and perhaps Washington after my term with the ORRC boards. I've always had a problem with board members being the state rep, and since my board term is going to be up, and I followed my presidency with ORRC as a state rep. Margie did as well, and it was a really good step for that. We are a state right now that has 2 world sportswear headquarters. We have a national sportswear headquarters and a regional sportswear headquarters, all within about a 6-mile radius of each other. And we have been unrepresented at RRCA for over a year. Washington State has been as well. I made that request in September. I made it again in October. I'm going to give them November, but if they are interested in filling this position, I am going to give them another few weeks, and then if not, I'm going to take on a project with another nonprofit. But I'm hoping to. I already have some plans. Last time I was state rep, Margie did this too. I went all around the state. I visited every club. I got to run with them, and I got to see how those clubs operate. I got to run some great races, Crater Lake and Circle the Bay, and some really great races. One of my favorite was Mary's Run in Central Oregon. And it was pretty fun to do that. And I think I can do a respectable job, even though I'm more restricted in my travels. We all are, because since COVID, we've learned how to do otherwise. But that's why I'm kind of back away. And I hope I get to go and have dinner at Mark's mom's house. But I'll go.
Oh, yeah, my mom she'd love to have over. Yeah.
I will get up and I will go on my own ticket. The club's paid for me enough times, and I've been a keynote speaker there. Every convention I've been to, I've been a panel moderator, and even the very first convention I went to, I was a panel moderator. So I know the RRC very well. I feel like it's one of the best. It was, I think still is, one of the best organizations out there for grassroots running. The USATNF, of course, masters the fast people, but I'm hoping that I can represent the state like I did, 20 years ago now. But anyways, those are my intentions, and this is why I've been kind of cryptic about it. I didn't tell anybody but Tracy and Julia until today that was my intention. It may shock some of you because I know you guys are really figuring I was eager to just get out, but
Get out.
right when they,
Suck you back in.
Godfather 3, right when you think you're out, they suck you back in. So anyways, now if they don't ask me in the next, by the end of the year, then I'm gonna, I hate to say it, but I really need to do other things. So I'm hoping that they decide that there's a priority and urgency to fill the state rep position. My feeling is I think I represent the state really well again.
Yep, I think you would too.
Cool.
Okay, the last item up for discussion is Turkey Trot.
Turkey Trot is on schedule. It's going to be awesome.
Woo!
just some dates that most of y'all already know already. This coming Sunday at noon, we're gonna put little chocolate turkeys in little bags. Many of you have already signed up. And then also another important date is the Sunday before Thanksgiving. Key leaders for the event, we're gonna meet at noon at the zoo and literally walk around and say, this is this and that is that, and answer any questions people might have. And some of you have done this before. And some have not, but everybody who can be there on that Sunday, plan on being there so we can be as ready as possible. I'm getting the chocolate turkeys tomorrow. I'm gonna pick them up. The beanies are at ORRC storage. T-shirts are being made right now. Carrie is on top of all the food prep, and purchasing and all that. Joel's gonna get the pies. Compared to last year, I feel quite ready. And having been through last year and all the changes we made, I feel good about that too. It's just the only thing, it's always, what's the weather going to be like? Who knows? But we're going to have fun one way or either way or one way or the other. But we are ready. By we, I mean
sold out.
By we, I mean we. Oh yeah, we're sold out. Yeah.
Yeah, the 5K sold out at 2,500. The kids run is still open through the day before. We're already getting people saying, I wanted to sign up my family. How can I get in? Can't get in.
How many slots are in the kids run? Because I'm supposed to be doing that.
It's open until the day before. So right now there's already 180 people, I think, signed up, something like that.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Typically we get about 200.
Okay.
So yeah.
Just imagine myself being overrun by little children.
And Mark, I
just
did
get out of the way. You just got to get out of the way.
And Mark, I did forward an email to you from the guy who wants to donate energy drinks, and I said you get to answer that one. So.
All right. Cool. All right.
All right. My suggestion is, since we got so much wonderful hard work done here tonight, is that we then skip the December board meeting. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Thumbs up. I'm seeing some nodding. Okay. What we could do instead is have a post-turkey trot wrap up like we did last year and talk about that. So that being said, I would love, I know Alan's not here, then this would mean that this is Daniel and Margie's final board meeting because they are stepping down in December. So they would not be here for our January meeting. So I just wanted to thank both of you so profoundly for the wonderful work you've done for us and for stepping up when you needed to and helping us get through the transition last year and staying on. You've just been a godsend to us. And so I just want to acknowledge you publicly for, thank you so much for everything you've done.
It's been my delight.
That's great.
I was happy to answer when Mark asked because he was pretty desperate. So.
Oh boy.
We called that emergency meeting. We all showed up.
Oh my gosh. That was amazing. Yeah. But
Also,
yeah.
I mean, bringing Margie back and bringing Alan back, being able to see what we did it's been what, 14 months?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow. I mean, that's just like, it's hard to believe. And it looks like the numbers are coming through. And I was pointing out to Carissa when Debbie was doing the budget was our previous treasurer told us that if we continued with the small race thing that we'd be broke by now. So that really didn't happen. So maybe we knew a little more than we thought we knew.
And adding more races back, the some of the ones that were the pride and joy. Autumn Leaves coming back. I mean, that's awesome. So yeah, I think that's pretty amazing. And just adding in a few hands and but you guys, Tracy, Julie, you guys have done some real heavy lifting. Greatly appreciate it. Mark, amazing. Mark Barrett, you guys have been so solid. So yeah, it's been fun.
We're not going anywhere. Margie and I we'll still answer the call.
Probably
That's
see me more
right.
often at the races now.
Well, we probably will. I mean, I love this promotion to participant. I feel like it really truly is a promotion. So thank you very much, and thanks for the honor of serving. And hopefully, if I'll still have a role at some point. Hopefully,
I'll still be picking your brain many times.
well, who knows? I might be taking my son on that drive, and I'll catch you guys raking leaves again. So
That's right.
And,
All right.
and Julia and Tracy, you guys have everything you need for doing the election. And like last year, you ratified it via email. So we don't need the meeting in December.
We don't need the meeting in December. Yeah, we can do it via email. Basically, we're going to turn everything on. We've got the ballot ready to go and the website's already updated. So I'll send something out announcing the results. So it's fine. And then
do we want to meet for pizza or something in December? I mean, I know we all probably got
you
stuff
can
going
come to the
on.
turkey trot wrap up.
When's the turkey trot wrap up?
We don't know. Mark has already left, but we'll figure something out so we can all meet in person.
Last time we met at McMiniman's and just
hashed it out for like an hour or two. Yeah.
I hate this. I mean, typically I don't usually do the turkey trot anyway. I don't normally, it's usually where I bail. But I'm going to just be really honest. I'm going to be a turncoat at turkey trot morning. I'm actually going to be running a race across the street
Oh, yeah, you do.
on Thanksgiving morning that I
love
can
the
walk,
Oak
that I can actually walk to, and the cost is $5 plus two pieces of food and or a toy.
Yeah.
So we can go there, and then if my son has a problem, we're just a block from home. So we're doing that instead. So I will be there in spirit, but I will be somewhere else in body.
That's
So,
fine.
but anyway, it's going to be a great race. It always is.
Yeah.
It's you got the best going there. And Julia and Tracy, I'd love to talk to you a minute about the awards. I have a couple of things so anyways.
Okay, we'll stay on.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Good to see you, Carrie. Take care.